By the end of this story, the most feared woman in the kingdom will stand on a balcony and watch 1,000 hostages walk away from her. And she will understand for the first time in 30 years that she has already lost. It starts with flour. Not magic. Not a sword. Flour. Because any warehouse man knows you never store flour next to fish oil. Within a week it stinks. Within 2, it gets thrown out. Dan had known that for 7 years. Now he is standing in a stranger's body, in a stranger's world, staring at barrels he has never seen. He is not thinking about how to get home. He is thinking that someone in this warehouse does not know how to store flour. That one thought will make him the most dangerous man on the continent. But first, rewind. Cold concrete under his back. Crooked beams above him. One beam is cracked, hanging by a thread. He tries to sit up. The body will not obey. These hands are not his hands. Thin, calloused, dirt under the nails. His own hands were wider, stronger, with an old scar across the right index finger. These belonged to someone else. And then someone else's memories crash into him like water through a burst pipe. A name surfaces first, Dan. Also Dan. An orphan. A laborer. 20 years old. Beaten yesterday over a broken jug he did not even break. Dan from Seattle sits in the body of Dan from a medieval warehouse, holding on so he does not go mad. He closes his eyes. Opens them. Barrels. Mice. The stench of rancid grease. He remembers the crack of falling metal, a shelving rack collapsing. 2 tons of canned goods coming down at once. Then darkness. Then this. He stands, his knees shake, his body is weak, starving, unfamiliar. But it stands. Around him, an abandoned warehouse, a shed pretending to be something grander. And the first feeling that rises in him is not fear. It is irritation. Clean, professional irritation. The flour sits right next to the fish oil barrels, soaking in the smell. In a week, all of it gets thrown out. The disgraced air of a stranger's body grits his teeth and gets to work anyway. He rolls up borrowed sleeves and starts moving barrels, then sacks, one at a time. He drags the flour to the driest wall he can find. Heavy items on the bottom, fragile items apart, every item in its place. 7 years of habit does not care what century it wakes up in. On the 3rd sack he finds a dusty stone container, sealed, hidden behind the boxes. He moves it aside and the air in front of his face changes, silent, like a screen waking up in the dark. Pale blue letters hang in nothing. He does not know this language. He understands every word anyway. Teleportation Warehouse, active. Operator, Daniel Rowe, volume for cubic meters, anchor points, 1 of infinity. Dan reads it twice, then mutters in a language nobody here has ever heard, that finally, someone built decent software. He reaches for the letters. His fingers pass straight through. The text flashes, the interface unfolds. An empty grid, each cell waiting for cargo, volume and status side by side. For the first time in 10 minutes in this world, the reborn wolf that everyone will soon fear feels something close to home. A brand new system, waiting for an operator. And the operator has a loader's calluses and 7 years of inventory experience behind them. He sits, clutches his knees, and does not think about magic or rebirth or how to get back. He thinks about 20 sacks of flour nobody will come for. About the city beyond these walls, about how much bread costs and who controls the delivery. These are the right questions. He does not know yet that they are exactly the questions that will make him dangerous. He stands, brushes off his knees, and heads into the city. Halden greets him with noise and filth. Narrow streets, open ditches, crowds jostling, swearing, stinking so badly his eyes water. He walks slowly, memorizing everything, an old habit that refuses to switch off. For 2 hours he does nothing but watch. Carts blocking their own streets, porters hauling boxes 3 blocks the wrong way. A crush at the market because the stalls have blocked the only path through. The city is a warehouse, huge, poorly organized. Diagrams start forming in his head without being asked to. He shakes his head. Not his business, not yet anyway. He stops at a bread stall, round, dark loaves. An old woman counts coins in her palm. A mother stands beside her children, looking at the loaves, not approaching. A man in an apron buys 1 loaf. He used to buy 2. Dan understands this language perfectly. When the economy drops, people buy less and buy cheaper. Only here, instead of brands, it is just food. And people count coins to survive, not to save. The slums stretch from the market square to the eastern wall. It is quieter there, and scarier. Children sit on doorsteps with empty eyes. Women wash clothes in murky water. Men wait at intersections for work that never comes. In an alley bakery, an old man kneads dough by hand, no sign, no license. A crooked oven smoking above him. The bread smells so good it makes a stranger's stomach growl. Dan stops. The old man looks up and sees an ordinary slum kid, skinny, dirty, a nobody. The old man says nothing. He simply breaks off a piece and holds it out. Dan takes it, nods, bites down. Warm, dense, real. He already knows from memories that are not his what happens to bakers without a license. Confiscated flour, a smash oven, no one to complain to, no one to stand up for him. This old man bakes bread not because he is allowed to, but because someone has to. Dan finishes the crust and looks at his hands. Someone else's hands, someone else's calluses. And he thinks of 20 forgotten sacks of flour, sitting in his warehouse, going to waste. He turns around and walks back. 40 minutes, doing math the entire way. 20 sacks, 30 kilograms each, 600 kilograms total. 600 will not fit into 4 cubic meters, to trips, maybe 3. He counts automatically the way a body counts breaths. By the time he returns, dusk is settling. Back at the warehouse, he places a hand on the first sack and thinks about the system. The interface lights instantly. He selects a cell. He pushes. The sack disappears, not dissolves, simply stops existing. An empty patch of dirt. A new line on the interface. 28 kilograms of flour, occupying 0.09 cubic meters. It works. He loads the second sack. The third. He stops at the 10th. Out of space, 4 cubic meters holds 10 sacks, not 20. And at the bottom of the screen, small text. Daily cargo turnover, 280 kilograms. Below it, another line. Expansion in 220 kilograms. Move more cargo. The capacity grows. The more he moves, the more he can move next. He needs a second anchor point, a place to send the rest of the flour. And he already knows exactly where. Before dawn, Dan leaves the warehouse. The city sleeps. Only stray dogs pick through the gutters. He walks toward the bakery, running a simple plan through his head. Stand still, mark the spot. Unload, leave. No talking, no explanations, no unnecessary attention. He reaches the courtyard. Behind the wooden wall, someone is already kneading dough before dawn. Dan stands in the tiny nook behind the fence and counts. 1, 10, 20. A full minute. The interface flashes. New anchor point confirmed. 2 addresses now. The warehouse, the bakery. Goods can move between them instantly. He unloads the first sack. It appears at his feet, silent, no flash, as if it had always been there. He arranges them neatly, flour to flour, labels facing out, though there are no labels here. Just habit. 10 sacks, then 15, then 20, standing in a neat row against a woodshed wall. The sun rises, smoke drifts from the bakery, the door creaks. An old man steps into his own courtyard and freezes. His name is Euro. 20 years baking in this alley, and he has never seen anything like this. Confusion first, then suspicion, then fear. He looks around. No one. Just a skinny guy sitting quietly in the corner. Euro touches the sacks. On his one, pulls out a handful of flour. White, dry, excellent. His hands are shaking. He asks who paid for it. Dan shrugs, says the flour was delivered, that it belongs to no one. That Euro can bake at the old price. If he raises the price, the flour stops coming. Euro's eyes go red and wet. He says the trading house tripled his price, and he thought he would have to close. He says his granddaughter went to bed hungry the night before. Dan listens, nods, does not interrupt. When Euro finishes, Dan stands and says it is time for him to go. Euro grabs his sleeve and asks his name. Dan says just Dan. Euro nods and says he will remember it. By noon, the smell of fresh bread hangs over the slum alley for the first time in 2 weeks. A line stretches to the intersection. 2 pennies a loaf, not 6. Dan watches from 2 blocks away as a mother buys 2 loaves and her children tear into the bread. With both hands. There is a lump in his throat, a stupid, sentimental lump. He swallows it and walks back to think. 20 sacks will run out in a week, maybe 2 if Euro is careful. Then what? He needs a steady supply. He needs to know where flour even comes from in the city. Who grinds it? Who grows the grain? What roads? What prices? It is a job for an entire logistics department, and the department is just him. Him. In the body of a starving 20-year-old porter with empty pockets and a system no one else can see. Dan sleeps on the dirt floor that night, fully clothed, stomach empty, having given away every sack he loaded. His last thought is that if storage safety standards existed here, this warehouse would fail its very first inspection. A crash wakes him. Someone knocking on the gate. It is Euro, standing outside with a bundle of linen cloth, bringing him breakfast made from that very flour. Euro says he has been thinking all night. 20 sacks is not a coincidence. A man who brings flour in the middle of the night and asks only that prices stay fair. is not some ordinary vagrant. Dan eats and listens. Euro says 14 workshops closed in this neighborhood alone over the past year. People are not starving because there is no food. They are starving because they are not allowed to have it. Dan already knows this, not from someone else's memory, from his own 7 years of watching managers hold back stock to hit quarterly numbers. Same game, different century, higher stakes. Euro mentions a granddaughter, Anna, 17, smart but wild, living on the streets, stealing to survive. Dan needs to get out of the city, find mills, farms, water sources, but he does not know the roads. He has never once ventured beyond the walls of Halden in his life. For 3 days he studies the city instead, block by block, the way any good logistics man studies a warehouse before he touches a single shelf. He marks for more anchor points: an eastern gate, a market alley, a well in the craftsman's quarter, a rooftop above the southern road. From that rooftop, he watches the whole southern thoroughfare: caravans, carts, guards at every gate. Halden sits at the crossing of 3 roads: coast to the west, farmland to the south, mountains to the northeast. Each road belongs entirely to one trading house: Valmont, Crashford, Belrow. Every wagon pays a toll, every seal is required. A perfect stranglehold on every single road out. Dan has not learned this from books. He asks porters, carters, market vendors, one working man to another. A porter is never an enemy to another porter. People answer him freely. He learns the grain is milled today south along a river, and a sack that used to cost 5 coppers now cost 15. Not because of any war, because the house tripled the duty simply because it could. On the 4th day, Dan makes a decision. 2 days south on foot, no money, no papers, no weapons. He looks at his hands, skinny, weak, calloused, the perfect disguise. No one stops a wandering laborer looking for work along a roadside. Before he leaves, Euro presses bread and dried meat into his hands so he will not go hungry on the road. A shadow flickers in the courtyard, quick and nimble. A girl watching from around the corner before vanishing entirely. Euro sighs. His granddaughter, wandering somewhere all night again. Dan shoulders his sack and heads for the southern gate. The road turns out longer than he expects, wide and washed out by rain. Deep ruts left by heavy carts. Guards check the wagons, count crates, apply seals. They never once glance at the drifter with a stick. Dan walks past the first house outpost, heart pounding, face blank. He sleeps under a tree that night, wrapped in burlap, staring at stars that belong to no sky he has ever known. And for the first time since he woke up in this body, it hits him that this system truly works. At any scale he is willing to carry. Not a trick, not a dream, a working warehouse that fits inside his head and answers to his hand. On the 2nd day the wheat fields appear, tall and gold, almost ready for harvest. He sees raw material, tons of it, grown by someone, sold at triple the price to people who cannot afford to eat it. By noon he reaches the river. 3 mills stand along its banks. To bear the trading house seal, guards posted, workers moving in orderly lines. The 3rd stands apart, warped wheel, no seal at all, barely turning. A thin man in his 40s sits by the entrance, tired, sacks of unsold grain stacked beside him. His name is Thomas Grant. Merchants used to come from Halden. Used to. The big companies bought out every merchant. No one gives a small mill without a seal a place in the market anymore. 40, maybe 50 sacks rot in his cellar. Mice eat what the market will not. Dan offers to buy every sack. Thomas looks at his torn clothes, his empty pockets, and says nothing. Dan sits on a rock and thinks. The miller does not need money most. He needs a market. Dan offers a deal instead. Take the flour now, pay in today's, and keep buying every week after. Thomas says Dan does not look like a merchant. Dan says he is not. He is a porter. Thomas stands, says fine. What does he have to lose? The mice would eat it all anyway. He opens the cellar. 47 sacks. More than a ton of flour. Dan marks the spot and starts loading, sack by sack, hands on his back the whole time. Thomas watches from upstairs as sacks vanish one by one, silently, without a trace. An hour later the cellar sits empty. Thomas's face goes white. Dan tells him everything is fine. The flour is safe. The money is coming in 2 days. Thomas says he is not asking where the flour went, that he does not want to know, that he will forget everything if the money arrives. The interface flashes new numbers. Volume, 18 cubic meters, 7 active points. Over a ton of flour that never spoils, never rots, just waits. Dan climbs out of the basement, thanks Thomas, and heads back to Halden, legs already aching, mind already planning. He makes it home by the 3rd day. Euro is nearly out of flour, only 3 sacks left of 20. Dan explains the math out loud, right there in the bakery. exactly what Euro earns per sack once flour and firewood are paid. Euro sits down slowly on his bench. In 20 years, no merchant has ever done math with him instead of at him. He pulls a tin box from under the counter, his savings 230 dimes, more than enough. Dan takes only what the miller is owed, 188 pennies, and leaves the rest for firewood and salt. Euro's hands are shaking when he takes back his own coppers. That night, quiet, check twice for anyone watching. Dan unloads 24 sacks into the courtyard. 4 in a row, 6 rows, exact as a store shelf. Half the supply, a reserve of the rest. Always kept back. Euro steps into the yard and sees them, neat, precise, and says even the trading houses do not stack flour like that. Volume climbs past 20 cubic meters. The system is gaining momentum, feeding on its own turnover. Dan realizes flour alone will not feed a city. There's salt, oil, medicine, tools, and only one pair of hands to fetch it all. Every commodity has its own supply chain, its own source, its own route, and every route must be walked in person. He needs help, not for carrying, only he can touch the system, for everything else. The next morning a girl finds him first, sitting on an upside-down bucket, eating a stolen apple, watching without fear. She says she has watched him for 3 days, seen him head south, seen sacks appear out of nowhere in her grandfather's yard. Dan says nothing. She says she does not care how, only that she wants in. Her name is Anna, 17, a pickpocket who learned to steal before she learned to read. He offers her work, not stealing, keeping records, tracking who owes what and how much. She cannot write. He says he will teach her. She agrees, on one condition: try anything. And she knows 7 ways to pick a lock. They sit on the floor with a flat board and a piece of coal, and Dan draws his first table: name, quantity, date, recipient. Anna copies it, a little crooked but every column in place. The tips of her ears, he notices, have turned red at his praise. Over the next 3 days, he walks the craftsman's quarter, listening for who needs what. A blacksmith named Graham, making nails from old horseshoes because there is no ore to buy. An apothecary named Bertrand, shelves empty, dried herbs run out 2 months ago. A seamstress named Martha, sewing with burlap because all the fabric costs like silver now. Each one is a point of consumption. Each one needs a point of supply. Dan does the math. Even walking every single day, it would take months to build a network big enough to matter. Months during which people go hungry and sick and pay 5 times what should cost a penny. He needs to move faster, and the system tells him exactly how. Cargo turnover feeds capacity. Capacity feeds cargo turnover. The curve only gets steeper the harder he pushes it. That evening he collects payment from Euro and leaves before dawn, back toward Thomas's mill. The same road that took 2 days, he covers in 1.5 days. His body is adjusting. Thomas is stunned to see him return with the money exactly as promised. He asks if Dan can take whatever he grinds every week. Dan agrees, and Thomas mentions an old widow upriver who evaporates salt from a spring, if anyone still bought it. Her name is Marin. Nobody comes for her salt anymore since the duties rose. Dan makes a mental note and heads upriver, toward a silence that rings in his ears after the noise of the city. Widow Marin has 30 bags of salt, dry, neatly shelved. She knows how to store things. Dan respects that instantly. He buys all 30, loads them quietly while she is not looking, and leaves the coin where the bags used to sit. She mentions a herbalist nearby, a girl who lives alone past the gardens, strange, but a real healer. Her name is Emily Carter, and the moment Dan steps into her cellar, everything changes. Shelves floor to ceiling, hundreds of jars, every item labeled, organized by category, by shelf life, by use. It is the best storage space he has ever seen in either of his lives. Emily blinks at the praise. She says she just loves it when everything has its place. Dan says he does too. He buys every item he can afford: fever reducer, antiseptic, cough syrup, dried berries for scurvy. She asks why a porter needs all this. He says there is a pharmacist in town whose shelves are empty, and there should not be a wall between them. Emily goes quiet. 6 months ago, a child in the next village died of fever because the medicine took 2 days to arrive on foot. Dan tells her that will not happen again. She does not believe him. Something in his voice stops her from arguing anyway. That night, under cover of darkness, he loads 38 items into the system. 50 kilograms. Gone in an instant. On the way home, he stops at Thomas's mill again. 8 new sacks. Volume climbs to 26 cubic meters. Anna is waiting when he returns, sitting on the floor with the charcoal slate, drawing something that almost looks like his table. She says men in fine cloaks came asking Euro where his flour came from. Euro lied. They did not believe him. An anomaly. 20 sacks at the old price in a district where bread should cost triple. Anomalies attract attention. Dan knows he cannot keep delivering through a single point. He needs more recipients, more names he trusts so no single delivery looks suspicious. Anna knows a soup seller to streets over, and an old coal merchant with an empty shed and a head for numbers. Dan visits the apothecary first. Bertrand opens the bag of medicine with shaking hands and does not ask where it came from. Behind the counter, quiet sobbing starts. Not the sick boy, his mother. Dan finds widow cane necks, cooking soup in a huge pot, buying rotten vegetables from middlemen at triple price. Then old man Morgan, a former coal merchant sitting idle in an empty barn since his license was revoked. Dan tells him he needs a place, and a man who can count. Morgan says he has been counting for 20 years. 3 distribution points now. Euro's bakery, Bertrand's shop, Morgan's barn. Small batches, different neighborhoods, none big enough to draw a house's eye. For the next week, Dan runs the loop. South for flour, upriver for salt, cross lake for medicine. On the way back he detours through 3 villages west. Buying carrots and potatoes, farmers cannot legally sell above their quota. The farmers do not believe the price he offers. One asked if he works for the trading house. Dan shows his hands. Calluses, not signet rings. The farmer sells him 3 sacks. By the end of the week the system shows 42 cubic meters, 14 anchor points and climbing. One morning a knock comes from inside the warehouse wall. A woman, bleeding, holding her side. Her name is Sarah Darris, daughter of a ruined trading house. Hunted by men from Valmont since the night before. Dan patches the wound with Emily's ointment. Anna watches and says nothing. Smart girl. Sarah explains everything. Her father hanged in a debtor's cell. Her mother dead of a fever no one would treat. She stole 1 scroll before they took everything else. The last debt register with her family's name on it. She needs a place to hide a day. Today's until the search moves on. Dan thinks his warehouse is a lousy hideout, but he has something better. A cold storage cell. He has never put a living person inside it before. He tells her to trust him. She nods. He touches her shoulder. He selects a cell, and Sarah disappears. Anna gasps, covering her mouth with both hands. The interface reads, Sarah Darris, status stable, time inside, 0. She is alive. Time simply does not touch her in there. That evening he releases her. For her, only a moment has passed. She calls it the longest dream, without nightmares she has had in a year. She looks at Anna's charcoal board and points out what is missing. No expense column, no margin, no receivables. In 10 minutes she redraws the entire system with double-entry bookkeeping. Every transaction logged twice. Dan feels something warm rise in his chest. For 7 years he entered data into systems someone else designed. This woman with a scar on her side just built the best structure he has ever seen in this world. Out of charcoal and scrap wood. He asks her to stay, not as a refugee, as a partner. She says partnership needs trust, and she has trusted no one in 3 years. He says trust is not necessary. Numbers are. If the numbers add up, trust will follow. Sarah almost smiles. One corner of her mouth. Then she asks to see his numbers. Her first move is a full report, and her first verdict is blunt. He is an idiot. 3 days a trip, on foot, alone. Maybe 100 tons a year for a city of 100,000. A drop in an ocean. The problem is not the system's capacity. The problem is his legs. He is the only one who can touch cargo. He is the bottleneck of his own network. Sarah draws 3 circles on her board. Supply, storage, distribution. Only the last one can scale without him. Euro, Morgan, Kane, Bertrand. Each one distributes through their own web, then only loads, and sets new points. She proposes a subscription model. Fixed weekly payments for guaranteed delivery. Cheaper and steadier than any middleman. Predictable cash flow he can actually plan around. For the first time since he woke up on a dirt floor. He asks how she learned all this. Her father, she says, spent 20 years building the most honest house in the city. And that honesty was exactly why Valmont destroyed him. Proof that trading fairly could still turn a profit was more dangerous than any rival. Dan tells her that her father was right. And now his model is spreading through a skinny porter with a magic backpack. For the first time, Sarah smiles for real. A whole second. Then her face turns to stone again. Anna becomes the network's liaison, writing messages, collecting orders, vanishing into crowds when needed. Dan keeps walking, hauling, tying, loading. Over the weeks the volume passes 60 cubic meters. 21 anchor points. Euro bakes. Morgan hands out salt. Can cook stew for the whole block. Bertrand treats the sick. People whisper about a man who brings food and medicine. Nobody knows who. Nobody knows how. They only know his bread never runs out. Whoever cannot pay today pays when they can. If they never can, they never have to. Back in Seattle, the write-off rate was 2%. Here, Dan sets it at 10. Because here, a write-off means a life. One evening, Sarah freezes over the ledger. The math is wrong. For tons through their network, worth $8,000 at house prices, sold for $3,000. A $5,000 gap. Over 6 months, that becomes $60,000. And $60,000 is the kind of number a house eventually notices. Sarah calculates 3 to 5 months before the leak shows up in a quarterly report. Dan asks what happens then. She says mercenaries, eventually, if the number climbs high enough. They decide to stay small and visible, a mouse eating one crumb at a time. Until it is too late to stop. A month passes, 31 days, 18 trips. 140 tons moved. Volume hits 120 cubic meters. 34 anchor points, 20 inside Halden. 14 beyond its walls. The product range keeps expanding. Flour, salt, vegetables, medicine, oil, honey, coal, leather, wool. Standing on his rooftop lookout, Dan watches a Valmont caravan roll past. 20 wagons of fabric that cost as much as silver in the city. He does not want their fabric. He wants his own routes, his own suppliers. A second layer beneath the pavement everyone else walks on. Walking home, he notices a tail. A man in gray, average everything, following from 3 blocks back. Dan does not speed up. He walks to the busiest well in the artisan quarter and loses him there. That night, Sarah says she expected this sooner. Faces in the slums are looking to well-fed. Someone noticed. For 3 days, Dan changes his routes, using shortcuts through basements and rooftops that only slum kids know exist. He decides it is time to go north, toward the mountains, toward or that Halden's blacksmiths have not seen in 2 years. 5 days over the pass, through territory he has never crossed, no guarantee of a safe road back. He tells Sarah he will be gone 10 days. She does not argue. The network will hold. Supplies will last 2 weeks. Before dawn, he leaves through the north gate. By the end of the first day, he passes a burned village, or Westmark against the mountain clans, and the border villages caught in between. On the third day, a mountain village called Steinhole appears, small stone houses, smoke, the ring of a hammer. The blacksmith works alone, striking nails out of old horseshoes because there is no ore left to buy. His name is Helm. The village mine is closed, bought up 2 years ago, guarded. Every scrap hauled off to a capital that never sees it again. Dan finds the waste piles instead. Discarded rock nobody guards because nobody thinks it is worth stealing. For 3 hours he hauls it by hand, chunk by chunk. His fingers bleed. His back will not straighten. The system's volume jumps to 150 cubic meters, just from the weight of what most people call trash. Helm looks at the growing pile behind his forge and asks no unnecessary questions. Mountain folk never do. Dan asks for finished goods in return. Nails and spikes he can carry back to a blacksmith in Halden with nothing to work with either. Helm shakes his hand like a sledgehammer blow and agrees. A 4th-generation smith trading directly again, without a house in between. On the walk back, Dan marks 3 more points, every stream, every fork, every ruin, each one waiting to matter someday. For the first time in his life, he is not maintaining someone else's network. He is building his own. And it is the best feeling he has ever known, in either lifetime. When he returns, the slum district feels different. People walk faster, straighter. Children are playing instead of sitting with empty eyes. Anna looks cleaner too, in a mended shirt, telling him Sarah started a barter system while he was gone. A seamstress mending clothes for food, a carpenter fixing furniture for salt, a neighborhood coming back to life on its own. Sarah has news, good and bad. The bad first, men from Valmont visited Morgan, asking where his goods come from. Morgan lied. They did not believe him. They promised to return. The house's analyst noticed a drop in a reseller's regular flour orders, and simple arithmetic told them someone else was supplying the slums. The good news, a woman from the upper city came asking to buy salt at a fair price, because her cook shops at Euros. The network has spread past the slums into the middle class, into houses with something left to lose. Sarah calls it both an opportunity and a threat. Money, but also a leak waiting to happen. And right then, everything about the network changes at once. Because Dan finally understands exactly what he is building, and exactly what it will cost him to keep it alive. He remembers a mouse infestation back at the Seattle warehouse. You cannot kill 100 nests by finding one big one. He restructures the whole network into cells, each link knowing only its neighbor, nothing more. Euro no longer knows Dan at all, only Morgan. Morgan knows an empty alley. The alley is just a wall and stones. Only Anna knows every link, which makes her the single point that could bring it all down. Dan tells her the truth straight. She says if caught, she will not say a word. He says that is not the point. She needs a backup. She names a boy, Patrick, 14, fast, too cowardly to steal, but knows every alley in the city. Dan tells her to bring him tomorrow, and keeps running his loop, faster every trip as his body toughens. Emily greets him one day with hot tea, mint and rosehip and honey, something to fight the exhaustion building in his bones. Halfway home he turns back to ask about the village where the child died. She says for adults, and to children are still sick there. She has medicine prepared but no way to send it. A half-day walk she cannot spare from her garden. Dan says she does not have to go. He will. 6 doses, each labeled by name, dosage, and instructions. He delivers every one, into every hand. Personally. Not today's. 6 hours. Emily's eyes shine when he tells her. She says nothing. She just goes to make tea. The 3rd month, Dan stops counting days and starts counting runs. 38 a month. 220 tons total. Volume hits 260 cubic meters, 50 anchor points spread across farms, mills, a mountain village, and half a dozen backup routes. For people run an empire that does not look like one. Dan loads. Morgan distributes and reports. Sarah calculates through the night. Dan sleeps 3 or 4 hours, sometimes less. Not from choice, but from a weight he cannot put down. Every sack he fails to move means someone's hungry night. Every jar of medicine he skips means a sick child waiting longer than they should. One morning, Sarah tells him he looks like a corpse. He says he already died once and looked worse. She is not amused. She orders him to sleep. A full day. No runs, no ledgers, no bags. He argues there is no time. Every missed day breaks the schedule downstream. She tells him plainly, if he collapses, everything stops forever, not for a day. He built a network with no single point of failure, except himself. He sleeps 16 hours straight. When he wakes, Sarah is drawing a new map by candlelight. A logistics diagram with one letter at the center. D for Dan. Every single line on the page runs through that one letter. She says he needs intermediate stops. Places where cargo waits so he can move to weeks' supply in a single trip, instead of every 3 days. The bottleneck is not storage. It is loading. Every sack still needs a hand on it. He remembers pallets from the Seattle dock. 30 boxes moved with a single touch of the forklift. He ties 5 sacks with rope, sets them on a board, touches the board once. The system reads it as a single object. 5 sacks, 1 touch. Thomas asks what he is smiling about. Dan says he just invented the pallet. Volume leaps to 320 cubic meters. He returns to Halden with a month's supply in a single trip. Morgan sits down hard on a barrel and calls it sorcery. Dan calls it optimization. That same night, Anna brings word that a middleman was dragged in for questioning. Arrested for selling less flour than usual. The house is moved from watching to acting. Interrogations first, searches next. Dan knows the pattern, just a different century. The answer is not to shrink. It is to spread faster than any raid can trace. One bakery is an anomaly. 100 shops are a new reality. Dan tells Sarah he is going west, to the coast, to fish, salt, and a route no house is locked down yet. Sarah asks him not to do this alone, for the first time in months. Her voice carries something other than calculation. He says he knows, and walks out anyway, because he is still the one person who can touch the cargo. The western road is wider, busier, every wagon stamped with the Valmont seal, one after another after another. By the 2nd evening he sees the sea for the first time in either life. Gray, cold, endless. Salt Haven appears below the cliff. 20 houses, boats on the sand. The smell of fish thick enough to cut. An old fisherman named Edwin explains the same story with different words. A quota, a middleman. 3 coppers a basket, half the catch rotting daily. Dan offers 5 coppers a basket, nearly double. And Edwin asks how he plans to move it past the checkpoint. Dan says not through a checkpoint at all. Edwin calls to other fishermen over. Speaks in a dialect Dan can barely follow. Then he agrees to sell everything he catches. To a skinny stranger with a stick who is clearly not what he appears to be. 10 baskets, 200 kilograms, disappear into cold storage where time itself has stopped. By the end of the week Dan has 6 coastal waypoints and enough fish stored to last a month. Volume passes for 100 cubic meters. On the walk home, he realizes fresh sea fish appearing daily in a city to days from the coast will raise questions no one can answer honestly. He needs it disguised, salted, smoked, a product that could have come from any caravan, any direction. Sarah knows someone, a fisherman's widow with a smokehouse standing closed for 2 years. Ovens still intact. The widow opens her ovens without a single question. when she sees fish this fresh delivered from nowhere. 3 days later, smoked fish appears at the slum market for coppers instead of 12. A line stretching until dark. Anna eats her first real meal of fish in her life on a rooftop, dangling her feet, calling it the best thing she has ever tasted. 60 reference points now for 100 cubic meters. 6 categories of goods flowing through one loader who never sleeps enough. In the 4th month, a cart driver on the southern road calls him something new. The silent merchant. No caravan. No warehouse anyone has seen. Goods that appear and vanish like they were never carried at all. Dan drinks his water calmly, thanks the man, and walks on with a cold feeling settling in his chest. A nickname means people are talking. Talking means someone is listening. Listening means, sooner or later, someone finds him. Over the next 3 weeks he makes 12 trips, pallets stacked to capacity every time. Cargo turnover jumps past 500 tons total. Volume climbs to 550 cubic meters. 80 anchor points scattered across a continent that used to belong entirely to the houses. Then, in the 6th month, on a morning run home, he sees smoke over the slum district that is not cooking smoke at all. Black, thick, rising from the very heart of everything he has built. Anna meets him running, pale, breathless. 10 masked men came in the night. They burned the smokehouse, they wrecked Morgan's shed. They beat a porter working for Bertrand. On Euro's wall, one word, written in charcoal. Enough? Morgan spits blood and says he saw their faces. Not guards, mercenaries. The kind hired to do the dirty work quietly. Euro stands at his oven, kneading dough like every other morning, and says he has baked through worse than this. Sarah lays out the choices: shrink and go quiet, or expand so fast that no crackdown can ever catch every thread. Dan chooses the second, because the first means the boy with the burn stops getting his ointment, and the fish rots on the shore again. He heads north that same day, past Steinhall toward the war, toward a place where the word bread sounds like a prayer. For days over the pass, past refugees fleeing by the hundreds, a war he never asked to be part of. On the 5th day he reaches a town called Trevlin, or what is left of it, gates boarded shut, smoke from fires burning furniture, not wood. Inside, the streets are empty. People sit by fires and do not move. This is not the ordinary hunger of an expensive loaf of bread. This is the hunger with no bread at all. 2,000 people roughly. Half a kilogram of food each, per day, is a ton a day. 7 tons for a week. He has for tons in the system. Enough for days. For days is still for days of life. He marks a point in the town square and starts unloading, silently, without a single word of explanation. Flour, smoked fish, salt, ointment, bundles of dried berries, blankets, firewood he thought to stockpile weeks ago just in case. The case has come. An old woman touches a sack of flour like it might disappear if she blinks. She asks who he is. He says he is a delivery man, and that he has brought them dinner. He sits on a step and watches people eat, silently, carefully, as though afraid the food will vanish before they finish. At night, a woman approaches, scarred across one eyebrow to short swords on her back, moving like a fighter even exhausted. She says she saw the sacks appear from nothing, and does not care how. She needs food for 12 people she led out of a besieged fort. Her name is Minsu Han, former captain of a caravan guard, now a nobody with nowhere left to guard. Dan hands her bread, fish, water. She takes it without thanks and returns an hour later, alone, asking for medicine for the wounded. She tells him plainly she will guard him now. He did not ask. She decided anyway. A man who feeds strangers out of thin air, she says, is either a saint or a fool. Either way, he needs protection. With Minsu at his side, everything speeds up. She knows every trail, every pass, every shortcut a decade of caravan work can teach. 10 days later they return to Halden. 112 anchor points. Volume at 700 cubic meters. The smokehouse has been rebuilt by neighbors in 3 days flat. Better than before. Euro is baking. Morgan is grumbling as usual. Sarah shows him the new report. Turnover up 40%, not because Dan carried more, but because people started trading with each other. A blacksmith trades nails for shelves. A carpenter trades shelves for medicine. A circle that no longer needs Dan to keep spinning. Sarah says this is exactly what her father dreamed of. An economy that runs on people helping each other, not on force. For the first time in 6 months, Dan feels he can actually breathe. It is far too early to breathe out. Anne arrives with news that turns his stomach. Lady Corvina Volmont, head of the house herself, has arrived in Halden, and everything Dan built is about to be tested at once. She has brought 20 mercenaries and Timage trackers with her. Sarah calms him fast. Teleportation leaves no magical trace at all. The trackers are not here for magic. They are here for people. Corvina's people walk the slums for days, asking questions, offering money for information. No one speaks a single word. Money means less in these streets than bread, and Dan is the one who provided the bread. 3 weeks in, they take Euro, not by force, an invitation to the Valmont mansion, one he cannot refuse without a raid on his bakery. Dan's face stays calm. Inside, everything pulls tight at once. Minsu reaches for her swords. Dan tells her no. Euro knows nothing that leads anywhere useful. The chain simply ends in an empty alley. Sarah warns this is only temporary. Sooner or later, someone finds the warehouse. Dan packs everything he owns into the system, and under an hour, the warehouse, his first home in this world, sits empty again. They move into a damp basement by the south wall, cramped, unremarkable, invisible. Euro returns after 6 hours, silent, furious. Corvina spoke with him personally over tea. As an equal, she said if the silent merchant does not come forward, House Valmont will cut off every supply to Halden until the whole city starves for one man's name. Dan understands instantly. She is not threatening him. She is threatening 100,000 people to force his hand. Sarah calls it a chess gambit, sacrificing pawns to protect a king. Dan says he is not the king. Sarah says to Corvina he is exactly that. Dan says the network will not die, because within a month he will have enough stockpile to feed all of Halden alone. 100,000 people, half a kilogram each per day, 50 tons a day, 1,500 tons for the month. He has 400 already stored. He needs 1,100 more, personally touched by his own hands. He tells Minsu to stay and guard Sarah, Anna, and Euro. She refuses. He calls it a request, not an order. She sits back down anyway. Dan leaves before dawn, into what will become the longest month of either of his lifetimes. The route becomes a pendulum, south at dawn for flour, west by afternoon for fish, north for ore, back at night to unload, then dawn again. Volume grows so fast he stops tracking exact numbers, past 1,000 cubic meters, then past 1,500. Even with pallets, 1,000 tons means 1,000 touches, thousands of lifts, thousands of steps down a road that never seems to end. In the second week his legs simply give out on the road between Cross Lake and Halden. He lies on the shoulder staring at a foreign sky. He rests 5 minutes, then he stands and keeps going. Emily is the first to say it plainly. He is going to die, not by any sort, from pure exhaustion. She sits him down, feeds him soup he is too tired to hold steady, spilling half of it across his knees. She says no one asked him to feed an entire town. He says no one asked him either. He decided because if not him, then who? She rests her head on his shoulder without a word. He freezes, unused to being touched in either life. It might be the strangest moment of his entire career as a logistics specialist. By the end of the third week he has 1,200 tons, 300 left to go. Corvina keeps her promise. Every shipment to Halden stops. Caravans turn back at the gate. Bread climbs to 20 coppers a loaf. Dan waits. Small shipments only for those already inside his network. The rest of the city goes hungry while he stockpiles in silence. It is unfair. He knows it. Feed everyone now. And supplies run dry before the stockpile is even finished. At the end of the fourth week, a note reaches Sarah through a chain of cooks and messengers no one can trace back to its source. Unitra, a hostage princess held inside the Valmont mansion, warns that Corvina is planning something worse than a blockade. 1,000 villagers gathered under a census, brought to the square as hostages. One executed each day until the merchant surrenders. The note includes a floor plan of the mansion, drawn from memory by a woman who has spent 5 years counting every stone of her own cage. And in that single scrap of paper, the whole shape of what Corvina intends becomes horrifyingly clear. Dan reads it twice, sits down on the basement floor, and closes his eyes. 1,000 hostages pulled from the very villages he has spent 6 months feeding. Farmers and fishermen he knows by name. Thomas the miller, Widow Marin, Edwin the fisherman, Helm the blacksmith, maybe Emily too. He looks at Sarah, at Minsu, at Anna. Sarah calls it a trap. He says he knows. Minsu says she is coming with him. He says he knows that too. Anna says she will give him her last copper coin for luck. He takes it, puts it in his pocket, and stands up. The system reads 1,460 tons. Not 1,500. Close enough. He tells Sarah that if he does not return, the network continues without him, on longer, slower, more expensive routes her father would have built anyway. Sarah says he will come back. He does not answer, because he is not sure that is true. That is the last thing he says to her before dawn, and neither of them knows if it will be the last thing at all. The morning is gray, wind from the east. low clouds hanging over a city that no longer feels like his. And somewhere behind him, unnoticed until this very moment, Minsu-han has quietly decided she will die before she lets anything happen to him. Dan walks toward the square. Minsu follows just steps behind, swords ready. 1,000 villagers stand in silence under guard. Thomas the miller, Widow Marin, Edwin the fisherman, Helm the blacksmith, faces he knows by name. On the balcony above, Corvina Valmont stands upright in a dark dress. Flanked by representatives of more trading houses come to watch. Crashford, Belro, 2 others Dan does not know. 5 of 7 houses gather to see one porter fall. Dan steps into the square alone. Minsu stays at the edge, covering his back without being asked. Thomas sees him first, eyes widening. The skinny guy who always came back. Who paid for coppers a sack. Who never missed a delivery. Dan shakes his head, almost too small to see. Stay quiet. He reaches the center of the square and looks up. Their eyes meet. Corvina looks like a manager, a good one even. The kind who sees a spreadsheet and never quite sees the people behind the numbers. Dan has met people like that before. A regional director back in Seattle who signed off on 50 layoffs without blinking. Because the quarterly numbers demanded it. He takes a breath. His voice is soft, but the whole square goes still enough to hear it. He says his name is Dan, just Dan. Not a magician, not an agent, not a god. A steater, a loader, nothing more. He says he has not come to surrender. He has come to show them something. He raises his hands, and sacks begin appearing above the square. 1,460 tons. Every single piece he has carried on his own back for 6 straight months. Flour falls like snow, quiet, endless. Mountains of it. Then fish, fresh as if pulled from the sea an hour ago. Because inside, an hour was all it took. Salt, vegetables, or nails, cloth, firewood, medicine, blankets. Every sack a story someone in that crowd already knows by heart. The pavement disappears beneath the goods. Mercenaries step back, out of room to stand. Among Valmont's own guards, sons of these very villages recognize the bread. It is Yoro's bread. Yoro's flour. Marin's salt. Dan stands knee-deep in sacks, hands hanging at his sides, face gray with exhaustion, and looks straight up at Corvina. He says, quietly, that she took 1,000 hostages, and he brought gifts for 200,000 people. See who has more friends. The square holds its breath. Then an old woman steps out of the crowd of hostages and stands beside him. Thomas steps out next. Then Edwin, then Marin, then Helm. 10 people become 20, then 50, then 100. Valmont's guards stand with halberds raised, and their hands do not move. Because a sergeant just recognized his own mother in that crowd. He drops his weapon first. A second guard follows, then a third, then 10. Corvina watches her mercenaries retreat and her own guards lower their weapons. 1,000 hostages turning into 1,000 witnesses instead. Her hands go white against the balcony railing. Her face does not move, but everyone below can see exactly what she has already lost. Around her, the other trading houses look away one by one. 2 of them are already leaving before she says a word. Corvina looks down at Dan for a long moment. Then she turns and walks back inside. The square exhales all at once, 1,000 breaths together, and the crowd begins to move. People sort through the sacks, not stealing, claiming. Thomas finds his own flour. Edwin finds his own fish. Every sack knows its owner. Dan's knees finally give out. He sits down right there among the sacks, and the exhaustion of 6 months lands all at once. Minsu sits beside him first. Then Sarah, pale, eyes wet, then Anna. Emily arrives last, having walked a day straight the moment a note reached her. Sitting down without a single word. A quiet priestess named Leah joins them too. A woman who met Dan somewhere between the 100th and the 120th point, on a forgotten road. 6 people on the pavement, surrounded by mountains of flour, and none of them move. Anna places a warm loaf on his lap, the last of the last delivery. Bought with the 1 coin she had sworn was for luck. Dan takes a bite. The bread is warm, delicious. The very same bread that started all of this, 6 months ago. When an old man broke off a piece for a stranger who had nothing. He looks up at a foreign sky, foreign clouds, and thinks for the first time without hesitation. His world, his city, his people. Quietly, in English, so no one else can understand, he says, "Okay, now you can sleep." Minsu does not understand the words, but hears the tone perfectly. She tells him it is too early to sleep. There is flour to distribute, medicine to send north, a smokehouse to check. Dan closes his eyes anyway, and says everything can wait until after sleep. They fall asleep right there on the stones, surrounded by sacks, surrounded by people. In a network that no longer fits inside any interface. 200 villages, thousands of names. Flour and fish and medicine and nails and blankets, all breathing on their own now. Somewhere deep inside the system, a quiet message logs itself without anyone watching. Operator 8, status active, service life 6 months, 14 days. A record, every operator before him died within the first year. Dan survives not because he was stronger, and not because he was smarter, but because he never tried to build an empire. He simply delivered what people needed, one sack at a time, one name at a time, one handshake at a time. And in the end, that turned out to be stronger than any empire ever built. Halden Square stays loud until dawn, full, alive, fed. 200 villages sleep peacefully that night for the first time in longer than any of them can remember. And nobody in that square goes home, because nobody wants this night to end. By morning, the story has already outrun the square, carried by carts, by cooks, by messengers who never learn his name. A porter who fed 200,000 people with his own hands, and asked for nothing back but bread and a place to sleep. Corvina Valmont does not send mercenaries again. There is nothing left to threaten. 1,000 witnesses cannot be unmade. Sarah rebuilds the ledgers openly now, no longer hiding a single line. Because a network this large no longer fits in the shadows. Euro bakes every morning, and every morning the line still stretches down the block. Only now nobody wonders why. Anna learns to write full sentences before the season turns, her handwriting steady, her columns straight. Morgan still grumbles that things were better organized in his day. Nobody believes him. Everybody lets him say it anyway. Emily's cellar empties faster than she can refill it, and for the first time in years, her medicine reaches every hand that needs it the same day. Minsu never leaves his side again, not out of duty, but because she chose it. The same way she chooses everything now. Helm sends her south twice a month, proud that his forge finally answers to no house at all. Edwin's boats go out every morning knowing the catch will not rot on the sand this time. The blacksmith Graham finally has nails to sell instead of nails scraped from old horseshoes. Bertrand's shelves stay full, and the boy with the burn grows up with barely a scar to remember it by. The other trading houses watch Halden quietly now, unwilling to repeat what happened to Valmont's name in that square. Corvina rules on, but never again with the same certainty that the world simply belongs to whoever controls the roads. Dan keeps walking his routes, slower now, sharing the weight with hands he trained himself. The system keeps logging, quietly, faithfully. A warehouse that grew into something no interface was ever built to measure. 200 villages become 300 within the year. Each one added the same way the first one was, with a handshake, not a contract. No trading house ever writes his name in a ledger, because Dan never once asked to be remembered. He only ever asked to be useful, and in this strange, foreign world, that turned out to be enough. The boy who once counted 14,000 items by memory in a warehouse near Seattle now counts an entire kingdom's hunger the same way. And somewhere between one life and the next, the loader who lost everything found something no promotion back home ever gave him. People who know his real name, people who wait for his return, people who would stand between him and any sword. Sarah once told him that trust is built on numbers, and the numbers, finally, all added up. Emily once told him nobody asked him to carry the whole world. He still carries it anyway, because somebody always has to. Minsu once told him that a man who feeds strangers out of thin air is either a saint or a fool. By now, half the continent has stopped asking which one he is, and simply calls him by his name instead. Dan, just Dan. Not a merchant, not a magician, not a king. A loader who never once forgot that behind every sack of flour there is a person waiting to eat. And in a world built on trading houses and locked roads, that one simple fact turned out to be the most dangerous weapon anyone had ever seen. Not a sword, not a spell. Just a man who refused to let a single sack go to waste. The story that began with a stinking barrel of fish oil ends with a kingdom that no longer trusts the old houses to feed it. And every single person in that square remembers exactly how it started, with a piece of warm bread from a stranger who had nothing to give but gave it anyway. That is the whole secret. If anyone ever bothers to ask him, there was never a secret at all. Just 7 years of habit, one broken warehouse, and a world that finally needed someone who knew how to keep things in their place. And so the flour, the fish, the medicine, and the friendships all move on without him needing to carry every last piece by hand anymore. The network breathes on its own now, the way any good system should, needing its builder less with every passing season. Dan still checks the interface every morning out of habit, not because the numbers demand it, but because some habits never really leave. Sarah keeps the ledgers, and it keeps the roots. Minsu keeps him standing upright on the days the exhaustion still catches up. Emily keeps the tea coming, and Yoro keeps the ovens warm. And neither of them ever asks him to explain how any of it started. Because in the end, it never mattered how. It only mattered that it did. The old man who broke off that first piece of bread never learned Dan's whole story. Only that a hungry stranger became the reason his granddaughter never went to bed hungry again. And that, in the end, was always the entire point. Not an empire. Not a throne. Just enough bread for enough people. Delivered by enough hands that no single sword could ever cut them all down. Somewhere far south, Thomas still grinds his flour at the same worn mill, no longer wondering if anyone will ever come by it. Somewhere upriver, Marin still boils her salt from the same spring, her shelves as neat as the day Dan first walked through her door. Somewhere on the coast, Edwin still hauls his nets in every morning, knowing the fish will reach a table before it ever has the chance to rot. Somewhere in the mountains, Helm still strikes his anvil, and the sound no longer echoes off an empty village. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a porter who died once under a collapsing shelf in Seattle keeps waking up every morning in a world that finally needs him exactly as he is. Not stronger, not smarter, just a man who never once let a sack of flour go to waste. That was the whole secret from the very beginning, hiding in plain sight the entire time. 200 villages did not follow a hero, they followed a habit. Repeated so many times it became impossible to ignore. Show up, carry the weight, come back tomorrow. Do that enough times and enough places for enough people. And eventually, an entire kingdom stops asking who is in charge of feeding it. They already know his name. And on the morning 6 months after he first woke up on a cold warehouse floor, Dan finally understands exactly what he built, and exactly why it was worth every single step. It was never a magic system. It was never a kingdom. It was never even really about him. It was 200 villages learning, one sack at a time, that no house, no seal, and no toll gate gets to decide who eats. It was Yoro's bread reaching a line that never runs out. It was Emily's medicine reaching a bedside before the fever wins. It was Sarah's numbers finally adding up the way her father always believed they could. It was Anna learning to write her own name in a straight, steady hand. It was Minsu choosing to stand beside someone instead of guarding someone else's gold. It was Thomas, and Marin, and Edwin, and Helm, stepping out of a crowd of hostages because they knew exactly whose side they were on. And it was one exhausted porter, sitting in the middle of a mountain of sacks, finally allowed to close his eyes. Somewhere behind all of it, the system kept its own quiet record, the only ledger that never lied. Operator 8, 6 months, 14 days, and counting. The longest any operator had ever lasted. Not because the system chose him, because he chose, every single day, to keep showing up. And in a world of trading houses built on locked roads and silent threats, that turned out to be the rarest thing of all. A man who kept his word. A man who counted every sack, remembered every name, and never once wrote anyone off the ledger simply because it was easier. That is what the villagers saw, standing in that square deciding whose side to take. Not a magician, not a savior, just a man who had never once lied to them about what he could carry. And when the moment finally came to prove it, he carried every single ton he had ever promised, and set it down in front of the entire kingdom. 1,460 tons of proof, falling like snow across a stone square that had never seen anything like it before. Proof that a network built on handshakes could outlast a house built on threats. Proof that a kingdom does not need a crown to be fed. It needs someone willing to carry the weight. Dan never wanted to be that someone. He only ever wanted to store flour correctly. But sometimes the smallest habit, repeated long enough, becomes the largest thing anyone has ever seen. And once 200 villages had seen it, there was no house left strong enough to make them forget. Corvina Valmont learned that lesson standing on her own balcony, watching her own guards drop their weapons one by one. 30 years of power, and in the end, none of it mattered as much as 1,000 people who remembered a stranger's name. She had spent a lifetime believing loyalty could be bought. Dan spent 6 months proving it could only be earned, one sack, one delivery, one honest handshake at a time. That difference is the entire story. Not a boy who fell into another world by accident. A man who refused to let that accident change who he already was. 7 years of warehouse work built the only weapon he ever needed, patience, precision, and the simple refusal to waste what someone else needed. And when the moment came to use it, he did not raise a sword. He raised his hands and let an entire kingdom see exactly what honesty could carry. Every sack in that square told the same story twice, once in flour, once in trust. And once people have seen trust delivered on time, every single time for 6 straight months, no threat ever sounds quite as loud again. That is what finally broke Corvina's certainty standing on that balcony. not the sacks themselves. The faces standing beside them choosing without hesitation exactly whose side to take. Dan slept that night surrounded by the very people he had spent 6 months feeding. And for the first time since he woke up in this world, nothing about it felt strange at all. It felt simply like home. Not because of magic, not because of the system, because of the people sitting beside him on the cold stone, refusing to leave. Sarah, who once trusted no one, sleeping close enough that her shoulder touched his. Anna, who once stole to survive, holding the last coin she had ever spent on someone besides herself. Emily, who once healed strangers with no one to carry her medicine, finally watching it arrive the same day, every day. Minsu, who once guarded gold for people who never thanked her, choosing to guard bread instead, for people who always did. Leah, who found him on a forgotten road and never explained why she stayed, simply staying anyway. 6 people, 1 porter, and 200 villages that no longer needed him standing over every single sack. The network would keep breathing long after this single night ended. Long after Dan finally allowed himself real rest. Because the system built to move cargo had somehow, quietly, become a system that moved people back into each other's lives. Neighbors trading skills instead of hoarding scraps. Strangers vouching for each other in front of armed men. An entire slum district that had once flinched at every knock on a door, now standing tall enough to look a trading house directly in the eye. That was never the system's doing. That was 200 villages deciding, together, that hunger no longer had to be the only order anyone followed. And once that decision was made, out loud in the middle of a public square, no house in the kingdom could ever fully take it back. Dan understood that even in his sleep, without needing the interface to tell him, some things once delivered can never be repossessed. Bread already eaten, medicine already swallowed, trust already given freely, by 1,000 people at once. Those things do not go back into any warehouse, no matter which house tries to claim them. Morning came slow over Halden Square, gray light easing over sacks still half sorted, over people still too tired to move. Euro was the first to stand, brushing flour dust from his knees, already thinking about the next batch of dough. He looked down at Dan, still asleep, and said nothing, because some things did not need saying twice. Morgan stood next, grumbling about his aching back, though everyone could see he was smiling under the complaint. Bertrand arrived within the hour, checking on his own share of the goods with the careful hands of a man who finally trusted the world to deliver on time. Widow Kane brought a pot of soup to the square itself, feeding anyone still too weak to walk home. Word reached the upper city by midday, carried by cooks and messengers who no longer bothered whispering. A silversmith's wife stood at the edge of the square, watching flour change hands without a single trading house seal in sight. She did not need an explanation. She could see it plainly enough. The old system had lost, and everyone already knew it. Corvine of Almont did not appear on her balcony again that day, nor the day after. Her guards, the ones who had dropped their weapons, were not punished. There were simply too many of them to punish at once. Word of the square spread faster than any caravan could carry it, city to city, village to village, along roads no house could fully control. Other trading houses quietly adjusted their prices within the week, unwilling to become the next name spoken in a square full of witnesses. None of them ever learned exactly how the sacks had appeared out of nothing. They only learned that trying to stop it had cost them everything. Dan woke near noon, stiff, sore, and surrounded by people who had refused to leave his side even once through the night. He sat up slowly, looked at the emptying square, and allowed himself, for the very first time, to simply watch instead of work. Anna handed him water before he even asked for it, already learning to read what he needed before he said it aloud. Sarah was already writing again, cataloging the day's shift and trust as carefully as she cataloged every sack of flour. Mincy stood watch nearby, though there was little left in the square that needed guarding anymore. Emily sat quietly beside him, her hands finally still after 6 months of grinding herbs into medicine no one used to want. Leah said only that the stones beneath them remembered this morning, and that some ground, once blessed by an honest act, stays blessed. Dan did not fully understand her, but he had long since stopped needing to understand everything before accepting it. He looked out at the thinning crowd, at people carrying their own sacks home instead of waiting for someone else to carry it for them. That, more than anything, told him the network had finally outgrown its own founder. It no longer needed one tired porter touching every single item with his own hands. It needed people willing to trust each other, and after this morning, that trust was no longer in short supply. Over the following weeks, the slum district rebuilt itself faster than any trading house rebuilt a single warehouse. The smokehouse stood taller than before. The bakery line grew shorter simply because supply finally matched demand. Bertrand trained a second apothecary just to keep pace, teaching a trade he once thought would die with his own tired hands. Morgan finally retired his old grudge against the trading houses, choosing instead to teach Patrick how to keep an honest ledger. Patrick, once just a fast pair of legs for Anna's errands, grew into a quiet, careful record keeper in his own right. Anna herself began training to more girls from the slums, passing along the same charcoal and board lessons Dan had once given her. The network no longer had a single point of failure, exactly the way Sarah had once diagrammed it on that first crooked table. Dan still walked his old routes, though slower now, sharing the physical weight with hands he had trained himself over long, patient months. He visited Thomas at the mill every few weeks, no longer out of desperate need, but simply because the old miller had become a friend. He sat with Marin by her lake more than once, listening to stories about a coastline she had not walked in years. He brought Emily new seeds from villages further north, watching her cellar grow even more crowded with cures nobody had to beg for anymore. Helm sent word twice a month from Steinhall, proud that his forge finally answered to no distant trading house at all. Edwin's boats went out each morning without fear that the catch would rot, before reaching a single grateful table. Every one of these threads, woven separately, had somehow tied itself into something no single house could ever again unravel. Corvina Valmont, for her part, never sent mercenaries after Dan again. There was simply nothing left worth threatening. 1,000 witnesses cannot be quietly disappeared, not even by a house with 30 years of practice of making problems vanish. She ruled on, still powerful, still wealthy, but never again with the same absolute certainty that the roads belonged entirely to her family. Somewhere in her own ledgers, a line she never wrote down anyway, she understood exactly what she had lost that morning on the balcony. Not a shipment, not a season of profit. The simple, unquestioned belief that fear alone could keep an entire city obedient forever. Dan never learned whether she resented him for that lesson, or quietly respected the cost of teaching it. It did not matter to him either way. He had never set out to defeat a trading house. He had only ever set out to feed a bakery. Everything after that first sack of flour had simply followed the same stubborn logic all the way to a public square. Move the goods, trust the people, come back tomorrow. Repeated enough times in enough places, and eventually a kingdom stops asking permission to eat. That was the whole of his strategy from the very first morning. Though it took 6 months for anyone else to see it clearly. Sarah once told him a network needs numbers to survive. She was right. But numbers alone never fed a single hungry child. It took someone willing to carry those numbers on his own back, sack by sack, mile by mile, before they meant anything at all. Minsu once told him a man who feeds strangers out of thin air is either a saint or a fool. By the time the story had spread across 3 provinces, most people had simply stopped asking which one he was. They called him what the cart driver on the southern road had called him first, quietly, respectfully, without needing anything more. The silent merchant, not because he never spoke, but because he never once needed to explain himself to be believed. His actions had always spoken loudly enough on their own, one sack of flour at a time. Even now, months after that morning in the square, new villages still send word asking to join the network he built almost by accident. Sarah handles most of those requests herself now, her ledgers stretching further than either of them ever imagined. On that first crooked charcoal table, Anna oversees the couriers, a small army of quick feet and careful eyes who know every alley the way she once did alone. Minsu trains a handful of new guards, choosing each one the same way she chose herself, for loyalty, not for gold. Emily's cellar has become something closer to a school, teaching new herbalists the same careful order Dan once admired on his very first visit. Yoro still bakes every single morning, though these days, someone else usually needs the very first batch of dough. He says he does not mind. He says watching a line of well-fed neighbors is the only retirement plan he ever wanted. Dan still checks the interface each morning, out of habit more than necessity, the numbers steady, the network humming quietly on its own. Some mornings he thinks of Seattle, of a mother who will never know what became of her son, of a warehouse that buried him without ever finding a body. He does not know how to fix that distance, and he has slowly stopped trying to. What he can fix is right here, in front of him, every single day, in the shape of a sack of flour or a jar of medicine. That, in the end, became enough reason to keep going. Even on the mornings the grief of an entire lost life still catches up to him. 2 lives, 1 habit, show up, carry the weight, come back tomorrow. It sounds too simple to explain how one exhausted porter changed the shape of an entire kingdom's trade. But sometimes the simplest habits, repeated with enough stubbornness, outlast every clever scheme a trading house ever built. Dan never wanted a title, and to this day, Nobody has ever managed to give him one that fits better than the one he already has. Just Dan, a loader, a logistics man, someone who never once let a sack go to waste in either of his two lives. And in a world built entirely on locked roads and silent threats, that turned out to be the rarest, most dangerous thing anyone had ever seen. Not a sword, not a spell, not a crown. Just a man who kept his word, one delivery at a time, until an entire kingdom finally noticed. The story that began with a stinking barrel of fish oil ends with 200 villages who no longer wait for permission to survive. It ends with a bakery line that never runs dry, a smokehouse that never goes dark, a cellar that never sits empty again. It ends with a girl who once stole to eat, now teaching other girls to read and write and count. It ends with a bodyguard who once guarded gold, now guarding bread, and calling it the better job by far. It ends with a merchant's daughter who once trusted no one, finally building the honest house her father always dreamed of. And it ends with one tired porter, sitting quietly among the people he fed, finally allowed to rest. Not because the fight was over, because for the first time since he woke up on a cold warehouse floor, he was no longer fighting it alone. 200 villages stood beside him that morning, and 200 villages have kept standing beside him ever since. That is the whole of it in the end. Not magic, not fate, just one habit, carried far enough to matter. Show up, carry the weight, come back tomorrow. Somewhere deep inside a system no one else can see, that habit still logs itself quietly, morning after morning, without fail. Operator 8, status, active. Service life and counting, longer than any operator who ever came before him. Not because the system rewarded strength, because it finally found someone who understood exactly what a warehouse is for. Not to hoard, not to control, to move what people need into the hands that need it, before it ever has the chance to spoil. Dan learned that lesson in a warehouse near Seattle, long before he ever knew it would save an entire kingdom. He never asked to become anyone's hero, and he never once called himself one. Not even after that morning in the square. He only ever called himself a loader, and in the end, he never needed to be called anything more than that. Because a loader who never lets a single sack go to waste can, given enough time, feed an entire world. And a world fed honestly, one handshake at a time, does not easily forget the man who fed it. Somewhere south, Thomas still grinds flour at the same worn mill, no longer wondering if anyone will come. Somewhere upriver, Marin still boils salt from the same quiet spring, her shelves as neat as the very first day. Somewhere on the coast, Edwin still hauls his nets each morning, certain the catch will reach a table before it ever spoils. Somewhere in the mountains, Helm still strikes his anvil, and the sound no longer echoes off an empty village. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a man who died once beneath a collapsing shelf in Seattle wakes up every morning in a world that needed him exactly as he was. Not stronger, not smarter, just a man who never once let a sack of flour go to waste. That was the whole secret from the very first morning, hiding in plain sight the entire time. 200 villages did not follow a hero. They followed a habit, repeated so many times it became impossible for any house to ignore. Show up, carry the weight, come back tomorrow. Do that enough times for enough people in enough places, and eventually, an entire kingdom stops asking who is in charge of feeding it. They already know his name. Just Dan, a loader who became the quiet, unshakable foundation an entire kingdom finally learned to stand on. And every morning since, in a warehouse only he can see, the system keeps its record exactly the same way. Operator 8, still active, still standing, still delivering, one honest sack at a time, for as long as the world keeps needing him.